This might just be my favorite Microbrand dive watch out there. Today, we're reviewing the Nodus Avalon. So what's up, guys? Welcome to this episode of the Budding Watch Enthusiast. So yeah, as I mentioned today, getting to my review of the Nodus Avalon, a watch that I've now had for a couple of months, and I got to tell you, this is going to be a very positive review. I know typically my reviews tend to be even-handed. I usually can find as many flaws as I can things to be really positive about. That's not going to be today. I love this watch. This watch has captured me in a way that no other watch that I can think of really has to this point. And it's really good. It's really, really good. Again, I'm going to try not to be too overly praise happy. So we're going to switch perspectives. We're going to go through the specifications of the watch as we normally do, and then get to my review here of the Avalon. So, of course, the watch does come in this cushion case that's kind of reminiscent of, like Seiko Turtles or Doxa divers that have the cushion case as well. Obviously, the difference that you have with the Avalon is you have these extreme angled sides that both come down from the watch out to its widest point and then curve in on the underside of the watch there that you can see. Mostly brushed finish here on the case. You do have these big, wide, polished edges on the sides of the case that kind of separate it out a little bit. And then, like I said, if you flip it over, we get back to, this very finely brushed finish. I shouldn't say a fine brush finish. It's actually a very heavily brushed finish that you can see those lines in there. And because you have these sides that angle inwards, it makes the watch appear slimmer than it actually is. Flip the watch over and you see a screw-down case back here that has a stamp of the Excalibur sword. Of course, Excalibur, according to the Arthurian legend, was crafted on the island of Avalon, hence the name of the watch, and hence Excalibur being on the back. And then, of course, you have the Nodus branding, the Avalon branding, and the fact that the watch is designed and assembled in Los Angeles. You have the screw-down crown situated at the 4 o'clock position of the watch. It is stamped with the Nodus logo on the side of the watch there. And the crown does have, you can see, this very wide, this very thick knurling on it, so it makes it super easy to grip when you have to interact with it. And of course, having the solid screw-down case back as well as the threaded crown, the Avalon is a dive watch that has 300 meters of water resistance. Now, the dimensions of the watch are interesting because, as we're going to talk about in the review, this is a watch where you can't necessarily get the full story just by looking at the spec sheet. So you have a width of 43 millimeters on this watch. You have a lug-to-lug length of 48 millimeters. You have a height. I measured it at 12.5 millimeters with my caliper. Nodus's website says 12.9 millimeters, so that might be at the very highest point of the crystal there. It might be 12.9. Again, I got a half millimeter shorter than that. And then you have a strap width here of 20 millimeters. Now let's get to what is easily the most distinguishing characteristic of the watch, and that, of course, is this beautiful blue matte dial that comes on here. Now, Nodus describes the color as a lazurite blue, and taking a look at lazurite, a stone that I had never seen before, I would say that that's a pretty accurate description of the color blue that's on this watch, and I've yet to find a watch that has just exactly this hue of blue on it, at least not one that I've come across personally. Again, it is a matte blue dial. You do see an applied Nodus logo, as well as the Nodus branding there at the 12 o'clock position, and then the Avalon model number in contrasting yellow, along with the 300 meter depth rating in white at the 6 o'clock position on the dial. Now, you have these steel-framed hour markers that do go around the dial, and I actually really love what they did with these. Now, see if you can notice the difference between the markers at the cardinal positions, the 12, 3, 6, and 9 positions. This wasn't something that I noticed right away when I first saw the watch, but after staring at the dial for a little bit, I noticed it. The markers at the cardinal positions are a little bit longer and a little bit wider than the other markers on the dial. It's really subtle, but I really like the fact that they did it that way, because that way you're able to maintain the symmetry of the dial. You're able to maintain the consistency of the design on the dial while still being able to easily identify where those cardinal points are. So very subtle, very cool way to do that you see here. The blue chapter ring here does have some recessed cutouts for those hour markers to sit in so that they're not crowding the dial too much. And of course, you do see a simple minute track running along that chapter ring as well. The sword-style hands that you see in the watch are diamond cut and steel framed, and they, as well as all of the hour markers, are filmed with a very healthy amount of C3 Super Luminova, which I will go ahead and insert a lume shot here for you guys. This watch burns super bright when it's dark, and it doesn't take being in the sun for very long to really charge up that lume. One of the more impressive lume jobs I've seen on a watch. And then you see the seconds hand going around there. I don't know the exact name for this style of seconds hand, if there is one. I'm going to invent one. I'm going to call this a candy corn style seconds hand. So I think that's a very apt description, and feel free to steal that from me. Now, the bezel has the appearance of being very flat. I don't see a whole lot of angle in the way the bezel's designed there. And the insert here is actually matte ceramic. This is the first watch that I think I've come across that has a matte ceramic insert. I gotta say, I really like it a lot. All of the numerals and all of the markers on the bezel are also filled with lume as well, as you saw in the lume shot there. The other version of the bezel that comes on this watch is a steel insert variant, but for me, I like the matte ceramic insert. For the blue and the green versions of the Avalon, it's going to color match. If you get the black, orange, or white version of the Avalon, then it's going to be a black matte ceramic bezel. You do have a polished steel frame that the insert sits inside of, and then if we flip the watch over, you have this bead blasted knurling on the sides of the bezel that makes it really easy to grip. You do also have cutouts at the hour markers there. Again, it just helps for being able to turn it. You can see even with gloves on, I'm able to do this pretty easily. There's really not a lot of backplay in the bezel at all, and of course, being a dive watch, is a 120 click unidirectional bezel that you get on this watch here. You do have a double domed sapphire crystal, and it is anti-reflective coated, but only on the underside of the crystal. Now, the movement that is powering this watch is a Miyota 9039. So, of course, the Miyota 9015 is probably the most popular Miyota movement that's used, especially among microbrands. The difference between that and the 9039 is the 9039 is the true no-date movement. So with 9015s, they have the date position built in. Even watches that don't have date wheels still have that phantom position. With the 9039, you don't have that. So if we unscrew the crown and we just pull the crown out to the second position, you see the second hand does stop. So again, it does feature hacking. It does feature hand winding, of course. The second hand moves at the frequency of 28,800 vibrations per hour. It features about a 42-hour power reserve inside the movement, and the accuracy that I'm seeing on my particular watch is around +9 when it's not being worn, and around +5 when it is being worn. Nodus does adjust the movement to be regulated at 4 different positions when they send you the watch, and +5 is pretty good for a Miyota movement. So if we flip over, we see a brushed H-link bracelet that does have polished sides with screw-in links, making adjustments very easy to do. You do see the brushed clasp here with a signed flip lock. The clasp does have that milling so that it does sit nice and thin on your wrist. I think this is the same clasp that NTH uses on their watches. You do see here 6 micro adjustments, so getting the perfect fit should be relatively easy for you there. And large wristed folks rejoice, because when I got this watch, I sized it for my 8-inch wrist and still had a couple links left over to spare. So out of the box, without needing any additional links, this might fit up to an 8.5-inch wrist if you need to use all those. That's pretty cool. I don't usually see that very often from watches that come with bracelets. And speaking of my 8-inch wrist, here is what the Nodus Avalon looks like on my 8-inch wrist. Again, a really good size, and we're going to talk about in the review how the dimensions of the watch don't necessarily speak to what you actually see in the watch, just because of how the case is shaped. It can be a little bit deceptive and actually wear a little bit smaller than its size would suggest. But this obviously is going to be a great size for me. And as you can see, being as the watch isn't very long, even if you do have smaller wrists, you still might be able to, wear this very comfortably. And I should also mention that when you buy this watch from Nodus, it does come with this very handy and very nice canvas watch roll. I only mention accessories when the accessories that the watch comes with are useful outside of just, being a box that the watch comes in. I've used this a couple times now to transport some watches around when taking multiple with me. So again, a little bit of added value there when you buy the Nodus Avalon. So as I mentioned up front in this review, I have a lot of really positive things to say about this watch and not really a lot of negative things to say about this watch, because for whatever reason, this watch has really just clicked with me ever since I first laid eyes on it. Now, one thing I want to mention up front, Nodus does something that I haven't seen too much amongst microbrands, and that is that they blog their design process for each of the watches, and it kind of details and outlines why they made the choices they did and kind of what aesthetic they were going for. Like with the Avalon, for example, they mentioned how, nobody does, brushed finishes quite like Omega does. So they really wanted to make a brush finish that was similar to the brush finishes that you see on Omega watches and things of that nature. I love this. I love the fact that they did this. I love the transparency in the design process. And somehow it makes the watch feel, I don't know, that much more personal, or you can see the personal touches in the watch a little bit more when you get that level of insight. It's something that I wish more microbrands especially would do more frequently. I'm going to put a link for it in the description below, because after you guys are done watching this review, I would highly encourage that you guys go check that out and kind of read over that, because again, I find it really fascinating and something that's really cool about Nodus as a brand specifically. Now, as far as the Avalon goes, it has this kind of cool duality in being a watch that sort of feels familiar in some ways, thanks to the clear, inspirations that it lifts from, the Seiko divers that I mentioned earlier and from Doxa cases that I mentioned earlier, but it still feels like a watch that's different than anything else that's out there on the market. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find another diver that is quite like this, that has, because it does so many small things, it does so many, very subtle things that really make it stand out on its own, I think. And I think every watchmaker out there obsesses over their designs, and they think of how all the various elements of the watch flow together, but I think some watchmakers are just better at doing that than others are. And I think Nodus does it really well with the Avalon here. Just the small stuff. I talked about the fact that the cardinal markers, are just slightly enlarged compared to the regular markers. And again, I love that because it makes this dial have a very consistent appearance. Like, they didn't feel the need to go with triangular markers at the cardinal positions that would have broken up the aesthetic of the dial, because this dial works really well in the way that it's situated right now. It's very smooth, it flows fantastically, and I'm really glad they resisted the temptation to put a date window on here. It would have completely ruined the symmetry of the dial. I know a lot of folks out there have lobbied them to make an Avalon that has a date window on it, and I gotta say, I really hope that they don't do it, because I think it's perfect the way it is right now. The Lazurite Blue is also an excellent choice. It's a bold, vibrant color, and it's different from pretty much any other blue that you see out there on the market. I also love the choice of the matte ceramic finish. I don't think a glossy ceramic finish obviously would have worked well. It wouldn't have paired well with the matte dial. I don't think aluminum would have worked as well for this watch either. Like I said, everything just works with the Avalon. Now, when you guys saw the wrist shot, you guys saw that the watch, despite being nearly 13 millimeters tall, didn't seem to wear that tall, and you can thank the design of the case for that. Having the sharp angles on the case, having the sides that angle in towards your wrist, make the watch wear a little bit smaller than it does, even though it's 43 millimeters, even though it's nearly 13 millimeters in height. It kind of gives the illusion of being smaller just because of the shape of the case. And again, it's a very unique shape. It's something you don't see often. Normally the sides will come straight down. You get the full bulk of those sides on your wrist. That doesn't happen here at the Avalon because of the choice they made to do this very angled case, a very unique case. The bracelet I found is also super comfortable, and that was a little surprising to me, considering that the bracelet doesn't have a lot of the modern amenities that you see on bracelets nowadays, like fully articulating links and ratcheting clasps and stuff like that. But still, this is one of the more comfortable bracelets that I've come across. It's not going to be good as, say, the bracelet on my SkyQuest, for example, but it's really solid, and I think it looks excellent as well. This is the first watch that I've ever owned that has an H-link bracelet, and that is a style that I actually like quite a bit. And it's also a nice change of pace from the oyster-style bracelet that you often see on most dive watches out there. Now, I will say the only thing that I find mildly bothersome about the watch is because there's so much lume on the hands and on the markers, that the markers that are supposed to be white do have this sort of greenish hue to them all the time when they are charged up, especially. I mean, you guys can see it in the camera here, that even though the lights aren't out, even though it's full brightness from my light box here, that you still see that greenish hue on the markers. Now, the good news is that kind of greenish color that the markers have complement the blue very well. But if you were someone that, likes your markers to be pristine and white, that might be something that bothers you. Again, it's a mild botheration on my part. It doesn't affect my enjoyment of the watch at all. And because I usually throw it in there, the Avalon is $625 brand new from Nodus's website. And as far as I know, the Nodus website is the only place where you're able to buy this watch brand new. Now, what clicks with people when it comes to watches is it's going to vary pretty wildly from person to person. And the things that I just outlined in the review are the reasons why I love the Avalon. It's some of the reasons I love the Avalon. But for some reason, this watch has just kind of captured me in a way that no other watch has to this point. And I honestly think that part of it is having that transparency, is having that kind of peek behind the curtain that Nodus gives you of the design process. I don't know, maybe for me, it just makes it a little bit easier to appreciate a watch when you have a really solid understanding of why it is the way it is. Finding Nodus and getting my hands on this Avalon here, it was kind of a revelation for me of sorts. Nodus wasn't a brand that I had much awareness of. Like, I knew they existed, but I didn't really know too much about them or hadn't seen them in the wild very often. And also, having gotten to sample some of their other offerings that they have, I've gotten to handle both the Contrail and the Nodus Retrospect, which are two of the other watches that they have. I definitely tell you that Nodus is going to be a microbrand that I will enthusiastically recommend to anyone looking for a quality watch, especially if you're like me and you enjoy kind of learning how the sausage is made a little bit, kind of seeing a peek behind that curtain, and having a great understanding of why this watch is designed the way it is. And that's an aspect that's not very often front-facing to us. So kudos to Nodus for, kind of shedding that light, and kudos to them for making a really excellent dive watch. I love this watch. It is really fantastic, and I'm, looking forward to spending a lot of time with it. And again, as we're heading into the summer here, I have a feeling that this watch is going to be adorned on my wrist very, very frequently. I also didn't mention, I usually do, it pairs just as well with a NATO strap as it does on the bracelet. And for me, the bracelet's just kind of the way to go because, again, it's super comfortable and wears really well. So guys, thank you so much for watching this review of the Nodus Avalon. If you found the video entertaining or informative, click the like button down below. You might know someone who would find this review useful. Do me a favor and share it on social media or in forums as well. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, if you never want to miss a video from me, you can click that red subscribe button down below and click the bell icon. And of course, if you want to see more day-to-day pictures of my watches, you can follow me on Instagram at buddingwatchenthusiast. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and I will see you the next time.